During World War II, one of Hitler's henchmen spent a large part of the conflict locked up as a prisoner of war of the British. Rudolf Hess, the Deputy Fuhrer, was even brought to the Nuremberg Trials and charged as a major war criminal, and he spent much of the proceedings sat next to Hermann Göring, the flamboyant head of the Luftwaffe. But Hess's final years were played out behind the bars of Spandau Prison, and he was considered the last of Hitler's inner circle left locked up. Rudolf Hess was no angel. He was a man whose office had helped to craft the Nuremberg laws that brought so much suffering into Hitler's Reich, but he escaped the hangman's noose due to the fact he had spent most of the most destructive years of the war behind bars. He also appeared deranged at the trial, rocking back and forth in a strange, uncomfortable manner. There has been a looming cloud over Rudolf Hess, and that is what happened on the 17th of August 1987 inside the walls of Spandau Prison. Prison guards rushed into the summerhouse in the prison's garden and found the corpse of Hess. He was at this point aged 93. There have been a number of questions as to the true fate of Hess's death. Was he killed by the British to save money, as Spandau was too costly, or was he a victim of some other force? In this video we're not going to look at the potential theories surrounding his death, just the hard evidence that was found in the autopsy report carried out following his demise on his body. Today we look at the autopsy of the Deputy Fuhrer. To support, please make sure to subscribe. Following the Nuremberg Trials, Rudolf Hess spent a long time inside of captivity inside Spandau Prison. As time went on, his treatment became more lenient and less strict, but from 1982 he was provided with a medical orderly who would tend to his health should he need it. Hess was costing each year 800,000 Deutsche Marks because of his imprisonment, and he was the lone prisoner there since 1966. For over 20 years he had cost a huge sum of money himself, and further concessions were made for him, and he was even allowed to garden when he wanted, and there was even a lift installed into the prison to allow him to reach the facility easier. But he did have his health problems. It was found in 1979 that he was suffering from a possibly fatal prostate cancer, but he remained an unapologetic Nazi until his final days. He refused to help his cause for release and continued to make anti-Semitic remarks, but on the 17th of August 1987, Hess was found dead inside of the prison garden. It was set up as a reading room, and he had, to those who found his remains, died by his own hand using an extension cord thrown over a window latch. On his person was an outdated note to his family, suggesting he had been considering this course of action for some time. He was to begin with buried inside of a secret location, but this did not remain quiet for long. However, in the hours after Hess's death, his body was subjected to an autopsy to find out what specifically had happened. The authorities knew there would be many questions regarding this, and Hess's own lawyer questioned that he was too old and frail to have gone through with this plan to bring about his own death. His son even claimed that he had been murdered by British secret intelligence services to stop him revealing information out about British war crimes during World War II. The autopsy of Rudolf Hess was carried out rather quickly after his death. Following his death, the body had been x-rayed, and in total there were 11 large and 11 small radiographs taken of his body. The autopsy of Hess was shockingly filmed using CCTV, and it found a number of injuries on his body. According to the x-rays, there were no injuries to his skull, eradicating any belief that he had been battered on his head, but the spine did show some injury. There were no fractures of the skull, but osteoarthritic lipping in the back, showing that Hess did have arthritis. There was also an endotracheal tube, a plastic tube inserted into the trachea to help him breathe, presumably by those who found the body and tried to revive the former Deputy Fuhrer. With regards to Hess's chest, it was found that he had suffered recent fractures to the 4th and 6th right rib and the 3rd and 6th left ribs. His abdomen was also distended as a result of resuscitation attempts. An old fracture was noted in his upper left thigh, and no fractures were noted in his arms. It was stated that the deceased Rudolf Hess was dressed in a grey jacket, grey flannels with braces, white shirt, white long johns and white boxer shorts. The body was that of a relatively well-nourished elderly man, 5 feet 9 inches tall. There were signs of recent hospital therapy to the left side of the neck. There were marks on the chest consistent with resuscitation. There were circular bruised abrasions of the top of the back of the head and slight swelling of the ankles. A fine linear mark approximately 3 inches in length and 0.75 centimeters in width was noted running across the left side of the neck, being more apparent when the body was viewed in ultraviolet light. There were no other marks or recent injury or violence to the body. What this part of the autopsy showed was that Hess had been taken straight from the prison for his autopsy, and that the mark on his neck where he had secured the cord to was rather faint, and he would have used a small finer piece of rope or cord to do this. With regards to the neck, it was claimed that reflection of the skin from the neck confirmed bleeding into the tissues in the region of the strap muscles on the left side of the neck, together with deep bruising of the left side of the angle of the jaw and over the left side of the inside of the back of the throat. The voice box revealed excessive bruising in the upper part of the right side of the thyroid cartilage. The pathologist was content that Hess's injuries around the neck were, in his words, consistent with compression of the neck, and there was further bruising noted around this area. The autopsy was incredibly detailed, especially with regards to the injuries around his neck. His larynx was even dissected, and this confirmed bruising. It also showed that Hess had a number of broken ribs due to the resuscitation attempts that had been performed upon him, and all of these fractures were consistent with the attempts to bring him back, and it was said that they had no bearing on the cause of death. These injuries do tend to negate the belief that Hess was killed by British agents or forces inside of the prison, due to the fact he quite clearly had injuries consistent with attempts to bring him back to life and attempts to try and save him. His heart was cut from his body, and his valves were checked, and cardiac-wise, his heart wasn't bad, and it was remarked that it was scanty for a man of that age. Inside of Hess's stomach was found a partially digested meal, and no evidence of medication was found. His liver was removed and weighed, and his spleen and kidneys did show sign of bruising, but yet again these were put down to the resuscitation attempts. One thing that was checked was the arsenic levels in his body, to check whether Hess had been poisoned or not. It was claimed in this report that the arsenic content of the hair was 0.8 mg per kilogram. The normal arsenic content is anything less than 2, meaning the pathologist was content and satisfied that Hess had not been poisoned. The pathologist then summarised, after a very detailed look at the former Deputy Fuhrer's body and organs, that the body was that of a well-nourished elderly man, 5 feet 9 in height. There was no evidence of natural disease which could have caused or contributed to death at that moment in time, which noted either by naked eye at the time of the autopsy or by microscopic examination of the retained tissues. What this meant was that when the autopsy was performed, Hess was not suffering from any diseases or serious illness which would have brought his death quicker. Hess was a man who was a severe hypochondriac, and he believed constantly that he was going to die, and he even took many herbal remedies throughout his life and ate strange foods to try and save this. He was, by all accounts, inside of Spandau Prison, a relatively healthy 93-year-old man, and his body showed that. The next point in the summary outlined what the pathologist's opinion was on the cause of death. He stated, marks on the body consistent with resuscitation were noted, and apart from the bruised abrasion on the back of the top of the head, all other bruising was consistent with having been caused by resuscitation. There had been quite clearly significant attempts to save Hess by the prison guards, and the bruise on the top of his head was most certainly caused by his head hitting possibly the window ledge as he brought his life to an end. The toxicology report offered no evidence against what would be expected, and the histological report into Hess's body offered no evidence that he suffered from any pre-existing diseases at the time of his death. With this, the pathologist claimed, external and internal features diagnostic of an asphyxial element in the cause of death were noted, and the linear mark on the left side of the neck was consistent with a ligature. The injury to the voice box, fracture of the right superior horn of the thyroid cartilage, was indicative of compression of the neck. He finished on the report that death was not due to natural causes, and in the pathologist's opinion he claimed that The cause of death was asphyxia, compression of the neck, and suspension. One thing to note is that the name of the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy of Rudolf Hess is redacted in reports and the autopsy to protect his anonymity, but it was known that he was a significant professor of forensic medicine at the University of London. He was not anyone who had come off the street, yet was a very experienced man. But the autopsy also showed that there were a number of items which were found upon Hess's person, which were passed back to the prison governors after. This included his clothes and also the electrical extension lead, a plug and socket of 8 feet 10 inches in length, the very thing that Hess had used to bring his life to an end. This leads to the conclusion that somewhere inside of a box, in some governmental building today, is the very piece of cord that Hess used, and it still exists. A final report regarding Hess's death does mention the cable, and states that many of the prison wardens recall seeing the electrical cable in the summerhouse, but none suspected it would be used for the means that Hess used it for. The actual cord, it was claimed, was an extension cable for 2 lamps. This cable had before actually been allegedly tied to the handle of the interior window for some bizarre reason. It's quite clear as to what happened inside of the greenhouse inside Spandau Prison's garden to Rudolf Hess, and this is that he died by his own hand, according to the autopsy. He had previous in attempting to bring his life to an end, as he had in 1959 and 1977 attempted to do this, and the second attempt actually forced the guards to relax the conditions of his imprisonment. Following the autopsy, the remains of Hess were placed inside of a metal casket, and then at around 8 a.m. on the 20th of August, the governors of Spandau accompanied the remains of Hess inside the sealed coffin from Berlin to RAF Gotha, and then to an RAF airfield near to Nuremberg, where the former Deputy Fuhrer's remains were formally handed over to the family. When reading through the autopsy report of Rudolf Hess, it offers a very interesting insight into the health of the former Deputy Fuhrer. For a man who was a hypochondriac, at the time of his death there was little to indicate that he was suffering from some serious disease and that he would die any time soon. He was said to have been in very good physical health. The pathologist even noted that his heart was relatively healthy for a man in his 90s. But on the 17th of August 1987, inside the summerhouse of Spandau Prison's garden, his life did come to an end. Whatever you believe happened to Hess, in this video we've just outlined the facts of the autopsy which was carried out. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.